it seems almost unfair to limit this to a middle grade novel because it's also a poetry collection amongst other things. So you know it better than I do. The last thing I want to do is me be here talking about your book when you, Mariama Lockington, are here and can tell us all about For Black Girls Like Me. So tell us about your book and what we need to know.
Yeah, so For Black Girls Like Me is a story that is a fictional story inspired by my own experiences, so an own voices story. And it is about an 11-year-old girl named Makeda who is adopted and growing up with two white parents and an older sister who is also her parents' biological child. But really, I like to start talking about this story because it's about a friendship initially. Makeda is has grown up in Baltimore with her best friend, Lena, who is also a Black adopted girl. And they have this strong bond based on their passions, but also that they share this common experience. And when Makeda's father, her parents are musicians, gets a new job in a different state, playing with a new symphony, Makeda has to leave behind sort of the only life she's ever known and her best friend for not only a whole new, school, but a whole new landscape. So she moves from Baltimore, Maryland, all the way to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and everything is really different. And while she's making this sort of, physical move across the country, she's going through some like growing pain things. So she's dealing with a sister who's too old, doesn't want to hang out with her. She's dealing with a mother who's going through some mental health issues of her own and a dad who's kind of absent. And so Makeda is starting to think and wonder a little bit about, how do I continue to be a part of this family and share who I am with them while I have all these questions and dreams about where I came from in the beginning. And then also while I'm trying to start over in this new place. And so when Makeda's transition to New Mexico and then her summer goes from sort of bad to worse when some things go down with her mom and her mom's mental health, Makeda turns to music and to sort of staying connected through letters with her friend Lena to sort of stay grounded in the world. So I like to say it's a story about friendship, about family. It's also a story about a young girl trying to find her voice and sense of belonging. And I think that when we're young, no matter what our context is, we're constantly questioning, do I belong here? Where do I belong? Who are my people? And then how do I express who I am through the identities that I am forming? And that's also what this book is a little bit about. So I call it my love letter to adoptees because it's definitely a book that when I was growing up looking for books on the shelves about girls who had my same type of family, I never found those books. So in some ways, I did the thing that I think Toni Morrison is attributed to saying, if there's a story that you want to see or read in the world, you have to write that story. In some ways, that's what I did with For Black Girls Like Me. But it's also a story that has so many, I think, universal themes, as well as the sort of specific context of Makeda being a Black girl adopted into a white family. So I'm having a lot of fun talking with young people about the ways they've seen themselves in the story, either directly related to Makeda's identity or differently as well.
And I assume you're not talking exclusively to Black girls that have been adopted by white families. I assume that multiple young people are able to come to this. It's a very universal tale. There's a way to identify with Makeda, I think, for every reader that comes in. So what are you hoping that people who are in that situation will take away from it, other than they're obviously, unlike you, who went to the library and wasn't able to find this book, they're here in 2019 going to go right up to the shelf. Oh, For Black Girls Like Me. Well, perfect. Yeah. That's that couldn't be more spot on. Excellent. Yeah. What are you hoping that they're going to take away from the book, and what are you hoping that people who aren't in that situation but can empathize with Makeda will take away from it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I hope my biggest hope is that young people who are adopted or growing up in multiracial families, maybe they have parents of different races or family members of different races, will be validated by some of the, experiences and feelings that Makeda is having in this book. I think, one of the things that I felt a really strong responsibility to sort of get right in the book was the fact that we as humans can live with multiple feelings happening at the same time. And one feeling doesn't necessarily mean a betrayal of another feeling. And so, as an adoptee, one of the things that's often imposed upon adoptees is this idea like you should feel so lucky all the time. You should feel so lucky that you've been given this quote unquote better life and that you were adopted. And what that does, it's not that we shouldn't practice gratitude in our lives, whoever we are. But what that does is sort of not acknowledge the fact that in order to become part of this family, a family that you were originally born into had to sort of fall apart, right? And so that there's a grief there as well. And so my hope is that this book for adoptees who, being an adult adoptee, talking to adult adoptees, where it's both things at the same time. Some of us both feel lucky and a bunch of gratitude and joy for the family that we were adopted into, and also feel this pain and this grief around something that we've lost, right? That we don't have access to because of our adoptions. And so my hope was in this book to validate the fact that you can feel multiple things at once. And so that dreaming about your biological family doesn't necessarily mean that you're betraying your family that you have grown up in. It means that you hold these two things at the same time. You belong in these two spaces. And so I hope that this book validates some of those feelings and wonderings for young adoptees or young people who are trying to put themselves into boxes or feel like I can't look at that feeling because if I feel those feelings or acknowledge that this is over here, I might hurt these people over here. And so that's a little bit of what I was hoping young people get away from this. And then also, so for people who are not in, Makeda's specific context, I think, again, just the understanding that we are human and that we feel lots of different things at once, and that the only thing that we can really control is our own agency and our own identities and our own feelings. And so I think acknowledging that sometimes really wonderful things happen alongside really hard things. Sometimes we leave friends and then we make new friends. Sometimes we are starting to find our voice, and then sometimes something really terrible happens with our mom, and those two things happen at the same time. And it's okay to be in that sort of messy place. That messiness of growing up is something that I really wanted to also validate in young people, or maybe even adults who are reading young people's literature, that it's okay to exist in those messy places, and to work through those, and to be confident in ourselves as we do that.
See, I don't like that. I want to exist where only good things happen. So how can I do that, Mariama? I need your advice to make my life constantly happy and perfect. No, nothing else. Thank you. I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's valid to also want to just exist in happiness too. I think, and I think that there are moments that Kata is existing in joy and in those moments, but there's also moments where she's not. And like I said, I was that kid who was like looking for stories that validated the sort of complicated emotions that I was having. And so in many ways, I wrote a story that I hoped would honor those things. And I was looking for a story that was like, yeah, sometimes really bad stuff or really hard stuff happens, even to young people, and to our parents. And we find out that our parents are not perfect, or that don't have all the answers, I should say. And then sometimes, even while that's happening, really wonderful, beautiful things are happening at the same time. And I always wanted those stories when I was growing up, because that's how I felt as a kid. I felt like I was holding those two things at once.
And then you discovered the secret you're not telling me to how to make sure only good things happen.
I don't know if I have that answer. I don't know. I wish.